Righto, so now we've got, certainly in my view and a lot of people, still the best developers here in the Gold Coast and Southeast Queensland in general. So join me in welcoming Brook and Damian. So Damian, obviously you've got Bolder Capital providing funding for various developments. Your family is also involved with Marquee developments and doing some projects yourself and with your family. And then Brook with Mosaic. Don't think you need kind of too many introductions in this room. Most people know the awesome stuff you guys are doing, and I think part of the reason I wanted to have you guys up here is because I think that of the overall market, you guys are delivering some of the highest quality projects and got a ton of experience. And I think that's what the market needs. The better the stock that comes to market and the more people that have a good experience buying off the plan, it just lifts it's the tide that kind of lifts all boats. And I think that's an important piece. And so, from your experience and what you're seeing out there, how are the market dynamics changing at the moment, that you've seen relative to, the last kind of 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, thanks for that very kind introduction, Mike, and for having us along today, and for everyone coming out and giving up their time. Yeah, look, I think that the major challenges are fairly obvious to most people in the room. There's a lot of experienced people across different parts of the sector here, whether that be development, construction, consultants, other developers, people in marketing, sales, media. And so at any point in the cycle, we're always dealing with certain challenges, and that's one thing about this business and that I've always said, that it's difficult to maintain success over a long period of time, and success means different things for different people. But I think success for us has been able to stay in the game. We talk about earning the right on a daily basis so that when we turn up every January after hopefully a bit of a break, that we've got the right to clip the ticket and go through the turnstiles and have another crack. And that only comes about if you've been responsible around managing relationships. Obviously, you've got to manage your balance sheet. Insolvency is always the first yardstick, but outside of that, it's brand, relationships and people. And so the challenges are always there. We're never in a market where we're not dealing with challenges. Some are more easy to predict and some of them will always be with us, and then others can come from left field. And if you look at the last 5 years, we went from sort of a market that tailed off pretty hard off the back of a banking royal commission and a little bit of oversupply in that sort of mid-teen cycles, sort of into 18, 19, and just starting to show some green shoots out the other side of that, and then a once in 100-year event in terms of COVID hit. And that created its own set of challenges, right? So there was some really great opportunity out the other side of that. There was a whole heap of, particularly for regions like the Gold Coast, where a large part of the population started to reassess things like lifestyle and the ability to be able to work more flexibly on a flexible basis, which means coastal markets in particular became very attractive for people as they could spend part of their working life away from capital cities. And then through that, massive demand that came out of that sort of COVID recovery period, we've had a massive dislocation of labour markets. And I think that's obviously the greatest challenge we face at the moment. It doesn't matter whether you're in a small to medium density world and you're in a unionised labour market, or you deal with a fully EBA market and you've got to manage the brotherhood on a daily basis. Either way, the labour market is fractured. We don't have enough trade base, a quality trade base, to deliver the amount of work in the market at the moment, and I don't expect that to get better. So there's a new, unique set of challenges no matter where we are. It's the ability to be able to respond to those challenges and try and foresee where there's an opportunity to do that better than most.
I think you've said most of it, Brook. I can't add a lot to that, but the point you do raise is the challenges we face today. There's always some different set, and I'm thinking when we started developing on the Gold Coast and investing on the Gold Coast pre-COVID, you couldn't sell it, but you had heaps of builders. You had everyone bidding for it, but you couldn't sell it. So we're just flipped now. So it's just a different problem that we're facing. I think the thing, though, if we kind of zoom in, is what's happening at the moment is we've had this huge ramp up here on the Gold Coast where the average price is significant. People affordability is an issue. Consumer confidence is down. This interest rate discussion that we all thought was gone has come back to the table. So what we're seeing just more recently is we're definitely seeing some pullback in the buyers. So we sort of had this, it's an interesting run the Gold Coast in that a lot of projects didn't stack up. Nothing was happening. So supply really shrunk because people said, I can't get a builder. And so with less supply, then the talk is interest rates potentially coming down. They're going to go down in second half of 24. So I think that really pumped up the market a bit. But now we're moving to another phase, which is a number of developers have spent the last 2 years to say, how do I make this project work? They've been through VM, they've found solutions. There's builders like Greyburn that have come into the market and really kicking some goals. So now there's solutions coming. So I think we're now about to go through a phase where we're seeing supply and more projects coming, but at the same time we're probably seeing a little bit of a pullback. Not that there isn't lots of buyers, but at what price point? There's thousands of buyers with $850,000 to spend on a two-bedder with a view. But, you go up and down the coast, everyone's asking $3, $4, $5 million bucks. There's only so many of those buyers. So that's probably this evolution that we're sort of focused on.
Yeah, and just on that, Damian raised a really good point, and I spoke about this recently at another event in Brisbane, and I think the current pressures, as they always do in any industry, is that the cream will rise to the top, is because it's about those that can solve the problems best. And I think what we've seen over this last period of time is when people who have bought sites that maybe the assumptions that they used to make the decision around that purchasing decision in the first place have turned out to not be the right assumptions, or they've been flawed, or the market's moved. And so then when people have then just used the common denominator of square metre rates to try and fix all problems, that's the challenge we have in the market. And that's why you've seen, as Damian points out, the rate of sale has slowed substantially, because it's, price at the end of the day, it's like weight. If you put enough on, it'll eventually stop a train. So you can't just keep increasing the price of your product to deal with all of the other problems that we're encountering around commercial viability, or changing the mix of product for a site that the market doesn't respond to in terms of the type of premium nature. Like, we're seeing sites that aren't really premium sites. They might be a B+ site, so a really good site, but they're not fully protected view corridors. They're not considered an A-grade premium site, and people are carving up that product mix to try and launch premium product to the marketplace at a price per square metre rate, which might make their feasibility finally work in terms of on paper, but the reality is the market's not going to respond to that type of product. So I think it's the ability to be able to really understand, if you're going to bring product to the market, who is the buyer of that product, what else can they buy for the same amount of money? In other words, what's the competition? And if you were in their same shoes, would you really pay that amount of money for that particular product in that location? And I think that's forcing people to really rethink what they do with certain sites.
I agree, and I think one of the things that many people would be surprised to the extent of is when there is mentions of interest rates going up, we see and we monitor our kind of visitor to inquiry rates extremely carefully, as you would imagine. It impacts our business in a pretty material way. And when we see mentions in the media, either a developer going under, a builder going under, or interest rates, we see drops of up to 40% in overall inquiry across the entire country. It happens almost immediately within a couple of days and can take months to recover. And so the sensitivity out there from the buyers, the traffic usually remains the same. So you get about the same amount of people that are thinking about buying stay there, but the amount of people that actually go through and make an inquiry, drops by 40%, and it will slowly climb as people get more confidence. And one of the things that we've spoken about at each one of these events in each state is that if something bad happens within the Queensland, or say a developer goes under, or like what happened with Rylan in New South Wales, we saw conversion in your market drop off. And it's obviously completely unrelated. It's a developer in another state, and we see an immediate drop in conversion. And I think we're all kind of working in the same ecosystem together that on the surface seems quite disconnected, but the data that we see, because we've got this kind of national view of what's going on, the market's incredibly interconnected. And I think that's why, as you say, when the times are tough and the cream's rising to the top, it kind of creates that cycle of confidence where some of the developers that aren't doing as good a job of it, they start dropping out of the market. More high quality project comes to the market, which creates more consumer confidence. But unfortunately, as that consumer confidence rises and people have that scarcity kind of concern about missing out, then we see lower quality operators come in, and the whole cycle does this thing again. So we're all in it together, that's for sure. So in terms of with the market where it is now as well, as far as that, where are the opportunities do you see right now? There's a lot of uncertainty, so where do you look?
Damian, you've got plenty going on, mate. So
I think everyone's just trying to figure out how to make a buck on these things at the moment, like how to make these sites work. I think the biggest obvious one on the Gold Coast is this missing middle, lower scale stuff that's 2, 3, 4 stories. away from these, larger projects. Like, that's just a huge opportunity here on the Gold Coast that you can deliver a price point which isn't getting really touched. And so I think that's probably one of the easiest things, but not many people want to do it. I mean, most people in this room, when your business scales up, it's not worth going and playing in that space because of the amount of effort. But it's just saying that is just low-hanging fruit that sits here on the coast because there's no land, or you go out to Sky Ridge and you're paying, 700, 800 grand for a block. You put, you're a $1.5 million package, and there's nothing left in Coomera, and then you've got to go to this apartment. So I think that's a really easy space here. And then obviously there's an opportunity with apartments, which is just back to your point. There is demand here, but the customer is very picky because people were buying 12, 18, 24 months ago with FOMO, and I just got to get in. My friends have bought, I'm going to miss out. And that drove decision making. That's disappeared now. People don't see the capital gains. They're not saying I'm buying that for $1 million, it's going to be worth 1.5. They're saying I'm paying $1 million. Like, can I live in that space? So that is the biggest thing now, that there's opportunity to create product, but you've really got to know, do I actually have a product that people want to be in?
I think Damian makes a really valid point. From time to time, I get quite a few young people in the industry that might touch base, connect, look for advice in terms of their future direction and where they're heading. And I see the biggest opportunity at the moment is for the next generation of designers, builders and developers coming through the marketplace. I look back to where we started out. We developed about 50 projects in what I call medium density before we took on a large-scale project, and I always talk about earning the right and building capacity over time so that when you develop that skill set, you're better able to deal with the things that turn up that you can't control. In other words, you're better able to manage risks because you built capability slowly. And I see that as the biggest opportunity in the market now. I think when I look at that sort of low to medium density, smaller scale project, people understanding that there's a real opportunity not to get too greedy, not to be too worried about whether you've got a really shiny project that looks good for Instagram or social media or whatever it is, and just focus on delivering a product that the market will respond to because they see value in it. And then being able to do that over and over again. I think the labour market from a construction perspective will free up a little bit in the next couple of years outside of unionised labour. So outside of the bigger projects, which is, for Mosaic, that's most of what we do and where we are, and that's just a function of where we've grown to over the last 20 years. But when young people come to me, I think the greatest opportunity is in the less sexy part of the market, so smaller to medium density projects. And it doesn't mean that it can't be design-led and they can't be beautiful projects. But I think in a market where you can control labour that's looking for work, that's dried up a bit, that it doesn't have to respond to IR laws, and where there's a massive demand for product in that sort of 1.5 million market, still within reasonable proximity to amenities. So I think that's the biggest opportunity both on the Gold Coast and Brisbane over the next few years.
And I think we've spoken, a bit about the kind of builder shortage piece, and one of the opportunities that's really created is when you've got the integrated developer builder. Obviously you guys are a good example of that, and there are companies out there right now looking at whether they can be merging or doing other types of deals in order to bring that capability internal to kind of address some of the challenges. What do you think about that? Do you think it's a good thing, a bad thing? Are there other solutions to the builder problems? And if you feel game enough for it, any thoughts on the this week's events with the CFMEU?
I thought I might get asked that. Just to touch on that first point, I'm a massive supporter of young people that are trying to develop their skill set and to build capability and to be able to build capability to address whatever problems they're facing in the market. And so I think there is a lot of people talking about, I might build in-house construction capability, and they say, well, you guys did it can't be that difficult. And I sort of say, well, yeah, it's sort of not, as long as you take a 15-year view. So, but there's some good examples of people that have done that really well. We've got Brent over here from Sierra. I've known Brent for a long time, and I remember when he moved from small to medium density now into some larger scale projects, and he had to invest really heavily in being able to build that capability. But I will say it's not for everyone. So if you don't have an understanding of construction, and if it's not naturally your skill set and you don't have a passion for wanting to understand how things come together and get built, like Brent started out as a chippy and a builder, so I think it's a bit of a different scenario to some other people I see coming through that say, well, I just go and hire a few people and we build a construction business. I think that's massively fraught with danger, because it's not just about hiring the right people that know how to build things, it's been able to build relationships with appropriate subcontractors and suppliers and build that trust over time and how to navigate everything in between. So whilst I think there's some merit in it, I think it's really fraught for danger if those people who aren't wired for it or get into it for the wrong reasons. And I think some of the things that I'm seeing, for those that actually recognise that it's not for them and they don't have the skill set and don't want to have to deal with that challenges, I think some of the really good opportunities we're seeing is when there's a greater risk-sharing arrangement between builders and developers. So if you think about it, delivery is a really strong barrier to entry for some developers now, and there's builders out there who have gone through a really challenging period that are trying to rebuild balance sheet and look for opportunities. So I think where there's value alignment between a builder and a developer, I can see that there's a partnership model where that risk-sharing arrangement between a builder and developer might be a better path forward than a developer trying to build in-house construction capability, and I probably think if they get the partnership right, that's probably a more sustainable path forward.
Yeah, I 100% agree with what Brook's saying there. I mean, what we're seeing is there's a lot of people have left some major construction companies, not necessarily the best guys, but they're out there saying they're the best guys and will deliver you an in-house construction team, and it's all care, no responsibility. And people, like when people don't have options, they take high risk, and that's what happens. So when there's less builder options, or they've got a builder but they don't like the price, so they think they're going to save money. The reality is they're not going to save money, and they're going to add a huge amount of headache into their life. I think it's a risky piece. The other thing is, if there's an issue on site, if there's a death, if there's a problem, if there's an injury, there is a function of liability that starts to come back on the table to a developer. So, a lot of developers are very small operators. It's a couple of people, they're having a crack, and that's great. But then to just say, I'll just start a construction business without an infrastructure, without quality control systems, I mean, it's a serious operation. And you've got to decide, do I want to build out a significant business? And I think in most people's heart of hearts, they don't. They're just doing it because it's their only way out, because they've got a deal and they're trying to figure out how to make that deal work. But you've got to be careful. We're not putting good money after bad. Maybe that project shouldn't happen. Just because you can build something doesn't mean you should build something. And, along the way, things go wrong. So, yeah, I'd definitely be very cautioning to people. I mean, because we act in a funding capacity, we have a lot of developers that come to us that are saying, I'm going to start a construction business. We're like, that's great. Well, who are your people? And they send me a CV. I'm like, well, that person you're saying's running your job's also been on these other 3 CVs for all these other guys saying they've got a construction business. So I'm like, they're just clipping the ticket from multiple people to be a face. So you can go out to your financier and say, I've built a great team, but they're the same people showing up. And a lot of these consultants, it's great because they make money out of this. They're going to do well because they're going to charge you 5 or 10 grand a month, and you 5 and 10 grand a month, and you 5 and 10 grand a month. And so they do all okay out of it. But if it goes wrong, you're left holding the baby. And you've then got to think the ongoing liability that sits around that. Because on the coast, the reality is we're delivering to owner-occupiers, not really delivering to investors. They have very high expectations. They've got a lot of time on their hands. They're retired. They're going to spend their life chasing you over everything, okay? And that's just the reality. And, that wasn't the reality previously, but that's the new reality now. And when someone spends, especially if they spend $1.5 or $2 million, I mean, what they expect for that, you might say that was cheap, but in their mind, they've worked for 40 years to make this big investment that is the most important thing in their life, and they are going to be on you. And so you've got to think around that, whereas previously you'd say, it's Hutchies or it's Multiplex and it would go to them, but if you're delivering it, they're coming to you.
So because Damian's not a builder and I was, I thought I'd just go a little bit light on to make sure I wasn't calling the pot calling the kettle black and steering people away from it. But just to give you some perspective, because Damian has raised some really, really valid points. We have about 330 full-time staff at Mosaic, a couple of thousand contractors, consultants, whatever. So it's a machine that's been built over a long period of time. A large part of that, probably half of that business, sits inside our construction capability, and I can tell you it's the most stressful part of our business. It's also the business that costs us the most money and carries the most risk. So within the 4 walls of this room, we have made money in our construction business for a long time, and it's on a yearly basis supplemented by a development business. And that's because we make a decision based on brand to have a presence for the next 2 or 3 decades in a market, which means that we don't get into a project where it's not working and then make a decision to cut corners because we're trying to stay afloat. And so because we're making a decision based on brand, and brand is the ability to deliver on your promise over a long period of time so that the market trusts you, then you pay for the ability to deliver on that promise because you wear all the risk. Because we sit on both sides as both the developer and the builder, all of that ultimately sheets back to one balance sheet. And so in starting a construction business, you've got to be really sure that you want to stay in the game for a long period of time and build out that capability over a long period of time. Because the only reason that we do it, and I get asked this all the time, is we want to control quality, program and our commitment to our clients. So we make a 25-year enduring commitment to all of our clients post-completion. So we don't sell letting or caretaking or management rights, and beyond any legislated liability we have for defects and or structural for 6.5 years post, we take a 25-year view, which means we can't cut corners because we stand there and look after our buildings in terms of caretaking and maintenance for the next 25 years. And so we wear whatever mistakes we make on the way through. And quite often, we're spending money on buildings not because there's anything wrong, it's because we're constantly trying to keep the people who live in our buildings happy, because they're the ones that are the ultimate ambassadors for our brand in the market for the next project that we launch. So I don't know, we're at a point now where the amount that we spend on a yearly basis on our existing buildings across Southeast Queensland is a substantial amount of money, and I can tell you 5% of that would be genuine defects. So that's probably just to give it a little bit more colour, because I think Damian raised some really valid points. It's not to put anybody off, but that's just the reality of the commitment to start a construction business if you want to do it long term.
I mean, how does this play out? Because, we can't kind of just get a ton of, well, I don't think we're going to, should I say, to get a ton of new labour, trades and the like to kind of have all these construction companies just pop up out of nowhere. That's not going to happen. And so people are sitting on these development sites and they're probably thinking, do I either JV with a builder, do I hire a lower quality builder, or do I sell the site? And so for option 3, are you starting to see, because I'm assuming that, and I haven't briefed you guys on this one, so but what do you think? Are you seeing kind of more deal flow of developers that are like, shit, well, I don't want to either do the JV and I don't really want to build the capability, I actually want to sell it? And is that starting to affect the price of development sites?
Look, I'll let Damian speak to this point more because of his funding as well as his development arm. He'll be seeing more sites come across his desk, I suspect, at different levels of the market. In terms of Mosaic, we're really, really specific about the type of sites that suit our brand in our markets, and we will never buy a site just to feed the machine or to pay our overheads, which means that the bulk of the sites that we've picked up, there's been a few opportunistic ones over time where somebody's failed and they've reached out, or the market got soft at a certain point just for a short window, and we happen to be through a relationship on the spot. But by and large, the vast bulk of all of our acquisitions are painfully slow, and they're based on relationships and building relationships with multiple owners that we've either approached or in partnership with some other really good people, including one in the room. I think that he does the dance for a lot of us these days, Antonio. But look, for us on the Gold Coast, I look at the last 2 sites we've put together. There have been discussions with various owners for something like 12 to 14, 15 months. So the point is, in terms of acquisition, we haven't seen any of that materially flow through to us because we're very specific about where we want to be. But I will say there's lots of people that have reached out during that time frame that have got problem sites where they haven't been able to find a builder or haven't been able to get the project to stack, or the viability of that project is now under pressure, and they're just exploring all options because it's at the point of, there's nothing left other than to sell the site. And what we're finding is that there's a lack of reality around the levers that require them to exit that particular acquisition or the mistake that they may have made in the first place. So we're not seeing that occur in prices of sites coming back, even if somebody is at a point that they realise that there's no other options. And more often than not, it's because the capital source behind it is the one who controls the levers. And if the capital source isn't impatient and there's no pressure to be able to liquidate that particular asset, then what we're finding by and large is that's not really resulting in opportunity at this stage. But I suspect maybe at the small to medium end of the scale, the ability to partnership with people who own or control sites that don't have the ability to deliver might be something that'll turn up in the next little while. But I think Damian would be a better place to comment.
Yeah, thanks, Brook. So in terms of sites, I think there's definitely a huge amount of what we call B and C grade sites that are behind the scenes softly on the market, testing to see what they're worth. In many cases, you could be given the land for free and they don't stack up. And so the reality is a lot of sites, their highest and best use is the existing house or the block of units, but everyone just thinks, because you can do X or some developer tied it up, got a DA, it's worth more. It's not the case. So construction costs, the impact is significant. And so it's really only A-grade stuff that's worth money, or you've got a unique site where you can deliver something in a very cost-effective way. And a good example is some of the stuff out at Robina, which I know Greyburn's been doing. They've large sites, they can get certain economies of scale, they can deliver at a certain height, and they can drive some savings in the cost base. But when you come into that more urban setting, smaller footplates, going vertical, if you're not on the front row or very close to the front row, it's not really the highest and best use. So then you've got people that have tied those up, they've settled them. Banks don't really finance holding land. So in many cases, the financiers are privates, or these, there's a huge amount of debt funders that have entered the market and raised money now, and so there's heaps of them. But there's this almost, I'm seeing a bit of pass the parcel where people are trying to sell their loans, which they've got to underperforming things. There's a bit of games going on in the background. People aren't really defaulting the loan. They're just saying, okay, you're at a 60% LVR. Okay, we'll extend it to a 70% LVR. We're just hoping that you can solve it. Developers saying, give me more time. So there's just going through that. And they're testing the market to see, can I find something? If they haven't settled, they'll walk from their option. So yeah, there's a variety of things going on there. But to your other point is, yeah, there's an opportunity to partner with builders. I think that is a huge opportunity for people. And we've seen a lot of builders becoming developers. That's probably the other trend that we're now seeing. There's several builders in the marketplace that have said, well, I'm just going to become a developer now. And so that's growing. So it's kind of coming in the other way too.
I spoke a bit about before the sustainability stuff, and we're just seeing that kind of like being screamed at us from our audience effectively, people looking for this stuff, using it as a popular filter on our site. In a lot of our consumer interviews, people are saying that it's important. But, I think there's a difference between people saying something's important and being willing to pay for it, because none of this stuff is free. How are you thinking about the kind of sustainability piece in relation to, are you embedding it in your projects more or less, and how important is it?
Yeah, I think the point you make around the stuff that makes people feel better about their contribution to global problems and all the rest of it versus how much people are willing to put their hand in their pocket to really commit to that. I think there's definitely a divide, but there's no doubt the sustainability piece will become more and more relevant over time. Our thing, like everything we do at Mosaic, is to make sure that if we commit to something that is genuine and it's not just to tick a box, or it's not just to form the basis of a marketing ad to make it look like we've been a responsible corporate citizen. So our sustainability journey is genuine, because it's about building better for longer and having less maintenance, because that feeds back into the overall sustainability of our business model whilst being good for the clients. So we communicate how we go about that process. So, we, for each project that we complete, we put together what is called the Mosaic Sustainable Journey for each project. And so we go into a lot of detail around what it is that we've done through the build process, and that might be design, construction, how we've dealt with waste throughout that process, materiality that we've used, and then how that flows through the long-term maintenance of that building, so that ultimately the client understands what's the benefit of what they've got in buying a Mosaic product. I think the key is the key is to be genuine and not to be superficial about what the sustainability journey looks like, because what we're seeing is customers, like every other aspect of their buying decision process, is very transparent, and they're very educated, so they can really understand now when they're looking at what sustainability means, whether what you're actually offering as a developer is something that is appealing to them and is a genuine sustainability commitment, or whether it's just window dressing to try and attract them as a buyer. So the only thing that we'll say to the sustainability bit is make sure that it's genuine, because most of the clients will know anyway. And from our point of view, we're not too interested in what the latest trends are. We're interested in where we can become a more sustainable builder over the long term, as that's going to be best for not just us but also our clients in the industry.
Yeah, I agree that was what Brooke said there, and I know inside the Marquee business 6-7 years ago there was like a minimum standards. There's certain solar, there's different things that are going to happen in a building, which are just good practice, because that was really about helping to reduce body corporate costs. Because the reality is right, a buyer wants all these things, but they don't want to pay $1 for it. But if you can show them that it's actually reducing their body corporate costs, well, then they might consider it. So you've got to link, there's got to be a trail of how the dollars occur, and they can see that actually this building runs more efficient because of those things. So I think that's a really important part of it. But, I think the other thing we notice is some of the buyers that are, say, 60, 65 that are buying, well, they're having input from their children that might be in their early mid-30s. And so it can actually be important to the influencer in the decision making because they'll say, well, what do you think? And we know that, it's the female is the decision maker on the purchase, so she'll go to typically her daughter or son and say, well, Dad and I are thinking of doing this, and what do you think? And so they're probably looking at it more than the actual buyer. And so that's where they do actually have a bit of a look into it, because they're probably thinking, I'll inherit this one day, and what's the capital gain, and what do I make out of it?
I don't think they're probably thinking, mate. I think they're definitely thinking.
And I think, like as Nikita mentioned earlier, it's like information is becoming more and more accessible. We're trying to do our bit to kind of make it more accessible for consumers and rewarding the people that are, as you say, actually doing the right thing, not being seen to be doing the right thing. So I think there's a distinct difference between those two things. And ultimately, we're kind of heading into a world where more and more of this information is going to become democratized, and it's going to be very damaging to developers' reputations if they've kind of cut corners to have it effectively greenwashed, only to, in 3 years' time or 4 years' time, for that data to become more available to people, and then retrospectively looking like they've got egg on their face after the fact. And I think that kind of doing what you say you're going to do over a long period of time is the way to build brand. And that's kind of what's going to matter, I think, increasingly over the next 5 years. And so with the government here, I mean, most property developers I talk to are not massive fans of the government, generally speaking, but I think Gold Coast seems to be, pretty progressive relative to the rest of the market. Do you find that how do you find working with the various councils where you've got projects?
Yeah, I think it's like anything, Mike. It's you'll get out of that relationship what you're prepared to invest in, and I think there's an expectation that government is there to service. And if you come into any market as a developer and expect that council needs to respond to your needs to give you the greatest potential density or the greatest potential development outcome on a particular site, you're wanting to push performance aspects of the assessment process, and then you haven't spent time building relationships on the ground or building credibility so that the government itself actually trusts that you're going to deliver on what you're going to deliver on. So we just see government like we do any other important stakeholder in our business, and whether that's local council or at a state government level, which we have a bit to do with as well, is that our view is we've got to be prepared to invest back into those relationships, and we've found over time that our ability to get the ear of council has been based on the fact that we've delivered lots of projects in these markets reasonably successfully. We've proven over time that we are going to do what we do, and we're design-led. And we're delivering projects that are sensitive to community needs, not just in terms of the product that we deliver and how that ends up sitting in the built form or the city skyline. It's how you deal with the community on the way through, because ultimately we're in an industry that creates a lot of disruption. And then it's the type of product that's left at the end of the day. So does the DA that you negotiated really hard on with council, is that reflected in the built form at the end, and is it a project that you're proud of and the council, and in this case Gold Coast City Council, is proud to have as product in their particular market? So my view is Gold Coast City Council, in our view, the head of planning there and the head of DA are very capable people. I've got a lot of time for both of them, and I think the teams that they've put together there are really good. Doesn't mean that it's not without its challenges, doesn't mean that we don't at times have to manage disagreement between our view and that of our council teams, but that's just all about communication, respecting the relationship. But we've found over time, if we understand what's really important to council, and for most that are really good at, and particularly town planning, understanding town planning for an overall city perspective and the future needs of that city, once you understand that through the eyes of a planner and an assessment team, then you can start to better identify what's really important for them in terms of the risk they're taking on through that assessment process. So, yeah, we've found across all of our markets that's important, but I think particularly for the Gold Coast, it's a more dense market. If you look at it, across the long stretch that runs north and south, really from Coomera all the way down to the Tweed border, there's a lot of density, particularly as you get closer to Main Beach, further south down to Rainbow and Kirra. So, yeah, it's a team that is better adapted to, I think, understanding the importance of density and how density relates to each other in the built form environment. So, but like anything, invest in the relationship well and understand their needs as much as your own. I think there's a really good path for managing good outcomes with the local council here.
Yeah, and I think the other one is, if you produce a building, get council out, go and show them your product. That's a really good way to not just say you're going to do something, but show them. I think, all the people inside council, you've got to remember, they're trying to manage. They're getting calls from neighbourhoods, people complaining. They're trying to take a bit of a broader view here. And they definitely, I think, are, to Brook's point, they're going to say, okay, well, we've seen a Mosaic product. It's a good product. We like it. So you say you're going to do something. Do you actually do it? What was the render? What's the reality? That whole journey is important. There's a lot of buildings built on the Gold Coast that, they're terrible. There's a bunch of buildings here, like really big, ugly, boxy podiums, no treatment, and that has caused part of the problem because people have come and done that at a certain time, and now council's trying to manage that moving forward. They actually just want to know what's created is a good positive impact. So if you can be seen to do a good project, spend a bit extra, don't VM this thing between what we got. I mean, one of the biggest issues that's happening in council, they said we approve the DA and then constantly we get these VM requests. And, that's part of a project, but are you ripping the guts out of everything and trying to make sure we've got something we're all proud of a city? Because that also goes back to the buyer confidence. The buyers were promised something, where they delivered that. Council was promised something, where they delivered that. And most of the probably people here today are actually in the business of producing something we're proud of. But there's a lot of development attracts a lot of people that don't really care about what the product looks like. They're just like, produce another widget. And, I know up in Brisbane, there's the same thing. There's projects up there and gateway sites into Brisbane that people are like, that thing is ugly. And it's stuck there for 50 to 100 years. So, we can't get upset. They're just doing their job to get the best outcome. And they actually work with people. You can sit down, you can work with them here. So I think it's a positive relationship you can have if they see that you actually care.
Well, thanks very much, you two, Brook and Damian. Appreciate you guys sharing your insights, and give us a round of applause.